I walked by a dwarf in the grocery store a couple days ago, and I'm pretty sure it was actually the first time I've ever seen one in the wild. I was slowly pushing my cart down the cereal aisle, and she came waddling past me in a hurry like she just popped out of a box of Rice Krispies. She looked about 60, and I know from watching Hoarders, because they featured one on there, that she was the type of dwarf who, has some normal sized limbs, but not all of them because they were not proportional. It would obviously be impolite to call her a knuckle dragger, but not terribly inaccurate. Now, none of this is meant to be like, oh, he's punching down on little people. Granted, they're too low to the ground to punch anywhere else. It would be more comfortable to start kicking instead, but it's just to help illustrate my experience of seeing a dwarf for the first time, and to set up further jokes about dwarves who I enjoy punching down on. I have nothing against them as people, but if you're an entity that exists, you're a potential wellspring of humor, and I'm willing to do the digging. Did you know the average height of adults with dwarfism is 5'3", but it also says the sole requirement for being classified as a dwarf is to be an adult less than 4'10" tall? Yeah, tell me how that makes any fucking sense. Is the Wikipedia high, or are they really out here like, the average height of dwarves is 5'3", but nobody who's 5'3" is a dwarf? Imagine being 4 inches shorter than the average dwarf, and a doctor's like, nope, you're too tall to be a dwarf, now let me lift you onto this stool so I can check your blood pressure. Terminology for dwarves has obviously shifted over the decades. We used to just call them midgets, but now only people like me still do that. Instead, there's dwarf, which to me already sounds offensive. Like if it was called Snow White and the Seven Midgets, that feels like the same energy. You could call it Snow White and the Seven Hobbitses, and that would feel more acceptable in my mind. If someone came up to me like, nice to meet you, I'm a dwarf, I'd be like, weird you didn't lead with your name first, but are you headed down to the Mines of Moria after this? I don't think Walmart sells corundum ore. One term I'd never heard before that the wiki so kindly graced my brain with is called person of short stature. Do little people really want you to say all that? That phrase is longer than they are. Do dwarves go to Disneyland and just watch everyone else go on rides? Imagine a dwarf trying to buy a fast pass and the guy's like, why, you want to get to the back of the line faster? Just as a PSA, little people have very short fuses, so it is not safe to light them on fire. The one I saw at the grocery store was being followed by a man of similar age, and I assumed they were husband and wife even though he wasn't tiny. Of course, neither was she. Like, she was little but not small, if you catch my drift. Those weren't sparkler thighs, they were straight up thunder. If she raised her arm, I would have expected Mjolnir to come flying through the store to her hand, and then she'd have to pay for all the watermelons it knocked over. But it's crazy that dwarves can still find non-dwarf love, you know? There are people out there who see a poorly aged toddler like, that's my type right there, a pedophile's worst nightmare. Alright, we did midgets for a while, let's switch gears completely and go after giants. Gigantism is seemingly a much rarer disease because I've never even caught a whiff of somebody over 6'5" in the wild, but these trolls can apparently grow to 9 fucking feet tall. It's weird that I have less reservations about making fun of tall people than short people. I wonder if it's because there's an inherent bias that being tall is better, and so people consider tall people to be better off and thus higher on the pecking order when it comes to having privilege or whatever. Definitely higher on everything else. Did you know a female giant is called a giantess? It's almost cute that giants are trying to replicate the elegance of a word like baroness, though, a noble title for a woman of high standing. Oh wait, I actually get it. Everyone's favorite giantess in the gaming sphere is Lady Dimitrescu from Resident Evil Village. Some people seem to have a keen fetish for being stepped on and having their necks snapped in 3 places. People who fantasize about giant ladies stepping on them should have their suicide notes written and ready to go at a moment's notice. So I went down a weird rabbit hole, and apparently the Prussian kingdom back in 1675 created a regiment of giant soldiers, and a bit later on, the king of Prussia became obsessed with them. He had a giant fetish. He was quoted as saying, "The most beautiful girl or woman in the world would be a matter of indifference to me, but tall soldiers, they are my weakness." The king himself was 5'3", so today he'd be the average height of a dwarf, even though nobody who's a dwarf is 5'3". But back in the early 1700s, everyone was short enough to be shot out of a cannon at a moment's notice. The king's kingly kink was to the point where other kingdoms would give him their giants as gifts. Like, hey, thanks for the sheep, you want a couple of our NBA players? In this time period, to join the ranks of the tall soldiers, you only had to be 6'2", but that height was few and far between in the vast sea of shouties the population was working with. That word's weird to say, matter-of-factly, in a non-black accent. It sounded like I said Saudis and just messed up, but I mean like the shawty got them apple bottom, you know? Okay. This king even tried to breed his tall soldiers with tall women to create a kingdom of supergiants, and when he was sick, he would have his regiment of ogres march back and forth in front of his bed to make him feel better. Imagine you had a fever in your bedroom and you had the power to be like, hey, can I get a parade in here, please? Careful squeezing the floats in through the doorway. We don't want to repeat of last time. There's actually another group of people I want to touch on, though never touch in person, and that's people who have Marfan syndrome. You may have never heard of that, but you've probably seen it in movies or TV. It's a disease that affects connective tissue and causes people to be really tall and thin with freakishly long arms, legs, fingers, and toes. Think Slender Man, or half the monsters in any horror thing you've seen. Protruding hips and curvatures of the spine are also possible symptoms, basically anything visually you can think of that would make the human body unpleasant. Actors with Marfan syndrome are generally called upon to play any manner of hideous beast or creepy demon, but to be fair, it's only because they're gross. And I've seen some people with the disease voice their concerns on Twitter before of being put in this box of like the ugly creature or the scary entity in media and calling for more inclusive and normalizing roles. But like nobody's making you the lead in a romantic comedy anytime soon. Those theater seats would be emptier than your inbox on Tinder. But hey, I've been there. Have to imagine it sucks when people can't find your online yearbook photos without turning off Safe Search on their browser. Well, that's going to do it for this episode. It's fun to take shots at the undeserving every once in a while. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, you can like, share, and subscribe. Watch all my other videos without ever turning around to look behind you, and I'll see you guys next time.